Have you ever like had one of those moments where like you're thinking something and you're like, wow, this is brilliant. This is totally my own original thought, right?
Oh, yeah, totally.
And then like you'll stumble across someone else maybe like a week later saying the same exact thing, or
Mhm.
you realize it like totally aligns with this group you're part of or
Right,
something. Makes
right.
you wonder, right?
It does make you wonder.
How independent like are our thoughts really?
Yeah, it really forces you to examine where your beliefs really come from and how much of what you think you know is actually shaped by influences you might not even be aware of.
Well, that's the rabbit hole we're jumping down today
Okay.
in this deep dive.
Right.
And we've got this article here called "The Illusion of Rebellion and Independent Thinking."
Interesting.
And it really kind of gets under the skin of this idea that like what we see as pushing back, being a free thinker might actually be us just falling in line with a different set of rules.
So are we really as rebellious as we think we are? That's the question.
Exactly, exactly.
I'm intrigued. Let's dive in.
So our mission as we kind of explore this article together is to really get to the heart of whether those moments where we feel like, oh, I'm so outside the box are really acts of like individual critical thought,
Right.
or if we're just adopting, a different code of conduct.
That's right. A different set of expectations,
Yeah.
but still expectations nonetheless.
Okay, so let's unpack this a little bit.
Yeah.
The article, it kicks off by looking at something I think we've all seen, maybe even lived through, teenage rebellion.
Ah, yes, the classic.
A teenage angst.
You know, the picture, the smoking, the specific style of clothes, the tattoos, the piercings.
Right, all those things that scream, I'm an individual, I'm different.
Exactly.
But the article makes this really interesting point that often this kind of rebellion isn't really about rejecting conformity altogether. It's more like they're just choosing which group's norms they want to conform to.
Yeah.
Right, so it's not so much about like I'm going to be totally unique. It's like I'm going to be unique like this group.
Yeah, exactly. They're trading one set of rules for another, one uniform for another, just with a different aesthetic.
Right, right.
So it's like that teenager with the ripped jeans and the, anti-establishment band T-shirt.
Yeah.
Did they really arrive at that look through some profound personal journey of self-discovery? Or are they primarily signaling their belonging to a specific subculture?
I mean, come on, we've all been there.
We have, haven't we?
I mean, maybe we weren't all goths or punks or whatever.
Right.
But there was a group, maybe it was the drama club kids, maybe it was the athletes, maybe it was the band geeks like me.
It's an interesting point, though, because it raises a fundamental question about motivation. What's
Yeah.
really driving these displays of rebellion? Is it genuine self-expression? Or is it more about finding a community, a sense of belonging, a place to fit in, even if it's by standing out?
That's a great point. And the article doesn't stop at teenagers, thankfully, because it draws a parallel to adults, right?
To the grown-up world.
Specifically to the world of politics.
Okay.
The voter's dilemma.
Right.
It suggests that, like, a lot of adult voters, whether they lean left or right, see themselves as these super independent-minded, anti-establishment, freedom-loving individuals.
Right, those who are fighting the system, going against the grain.
Yeah, but here's the catch, and this is what the article dives into.
I'm listening.
It argues that these voters, despite their, strong belief in their own independent thinking, often end up supporting policies that, when you actually look closely, have a strong element of, well, what the article calls authoritarian tendencies.
Authoritarian, okay. So we're talking about policies that, despite being championed by those who see themselves as pro-freedom, actually involve a degree of control, of imposed authority, of top-down decision-making, right?
Exactly. And
Okay.
it's almost like this paradox, right?
It is a paradox.
Where the desire to be against something, to be anti-establishment, can actually blind you to the potential for control or even, oppression within your own chosen side.
It's like we're so focused on being against the other that we become less critical of our own tribe, even if our tribe starts exhibiting some of the very behaviors we claim to oppose.
And the article gives some, really specific examples of this, right?
Yeah.
It talks about, for instance, Democrats who,
Yeah.
Often champion individual liberties, who might, rail against corporate power,
Right.
But then, they could find themselves supporting corporate mandates, especially in areas like public health or something like that.
Right. The idea being that in certain situations, the desire for collective good, for safety, for health might override the individualistic principles they typically espouse.
And then on the flip side, the article talks about Republicans
Yeah.
who, classically advocate for limited government.
Individual responsibility, less government intervention.
Right, but then they might fully support the expansion of state power in areas like border control or drug enforcement.
So again, a potential conflict between stated principles and actual policy support.
Yeah, so the core point the article is making here is that even though these voters, on either side might really believe that they're independent thinkers fighting the system,
Yeah.
they could actually just be conforming to different sets of established ideologies.
Right. The different sets of accepted beliefs within their chosen political camp.
It's like we all crave that sense of belonging, of fighting for something bigger than ourselves.
It's a very human need to be part of a group, a tribe.
Right.
And the article's point is that sometimes that need can lead us to align ourselves with groups whose ideologies, upon closer examination, might not fully align with our own values or principles.
And you know what? The article even goes a step further.
Oh.
It starts to question
Uh-huh.
the very nature of these anti-establishment figures we see in politics. These outsiders, these rebels, these people who are, presented as shaking things up.
Yeah. The mavericks, the ones who are going to change everything.
Right. And the article argues that in reality, these figures, despite their, outsider image, are actually still very much embedded within the existing power structures.
So they're playing the game, even if they're playing it on their own terms.
Yeah, and this is where the article gets a little, I guess you could say, direct. It doesn't really mince words.
Okay, I'm ready.
It describes voters who blindly follow these figures and align with parties as well as weak-minded, unthinking dupes.
Wow, okay. That's pretty strong language.
Yeah, it is. But the article is basically suggesting that for a lot of people, aligning with a particular political figure or party becomes an easy way to feel like they're rebelling, like they're part of something bigger, without actually doing the hard work of thinking critically about the issues.
So it's a form of rebellion, but a prepackaged one, you could say.
Exactly. And, as someone who, has spent a lot of time thinking about politics and ideology, I kind of get where the article is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I do think there's a strong element of tribalism in politics, right?
Oh, absolutely. That human tendency to identify strongly with groups and favor their interests is definitely at play in the political arena.
But do you think maybe the article is overlooking the genuine desire for positive change that motivates a lot of voters, even within party lines?
It's a good question. And you're right. I mean, many people are genuinely passionate about making a positive difference.
Right.
The article definitely presents a somewhat cynical view, but I think its core argument isn't necessarily about denying people's good intentions. I think it's more about challenging whether those intentions are really being served by simply aligning with a prepackaged ideology,
Right.
regardless of its internal contradictions or potential for unintended consequences.
Yeah, I think that's a good distinction.
It's easy to get caught up in the us versus them mentality
Oh, for sure.
and to overlook the nuances and complexities of the issues.
For sure, for sure.
But, on that note,
Yeah.
speaking of seeing things clearly, or perhaps not so clearly,
Okay.
the article then digs into this phenomenon of the double standard
Yeah.
and the hypocrisy that seems to be everywhere in politics.
Like so much hypocrisy.
So much. It highlights how easy it is for us to spot the inconsistencies and hypocrisies in the other side,
Right.
while often remaining completely blind to our own contradictions.
It's like we have these blinders on.
Yeah, exactly. It's a classic case of in-group bias.
Oh, tell me about it.
We tend to be much more forgiving of our own group's actions and much more critical of those outside our group, even when the actions are essentially the same.
Right, right.
And the article gives some really sharp examples of this in the political sphere.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, so imagine this.
Mm-hmm.
You have conservatives who are often very vocal about their criticism of liberal support for corporate power, especially when it aligns with liberal social agendas like, certain public health mandates.
Yeah. Yeah.
The conservative argument might be that, liberals are abandoning their supposed skepticism of big business when it's convenient for their political goals.
Okay. Okay. I've definitely heard that one.
Right. And then at the same time, you have liberals pointing out the hypocrisy of conservatives who champion individual freedom, but then readily support government overreach in areas like immigration or drug policy.
It's like everyone's playing this game of gotcha.
Yeah, exactly. It's a constant back and forth of pointing fingers and highlighting the other side's flaws while conveniently overlooking our own.
And it makes you wonder, is this a deliberate thing?
Hmm.
Or is it more of an unconscious bias, a psychological blind spot?
I think it's probably a bit of both.
Yeah.
There's definitely an element of motivated reasoning at play, where we actively seek out and interpret information in a way that confirms our pre-existing beliefs.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
But it's not always conscious.
Right.
We also have these inherent cognitive biases like confirmation bias, which makes us naturally gravitate towards information that supports our existing worldview and ignore or downplay information that challenges it.
It's like our brains are wired to protect our beliefs, even if those beliefs aren't entirely rational or consistent.
And that's a big part of what makes it so hard to have productive conversations across political divides.
Absolutely.
They're often talking past each other, unable to even acknowledge the validity of the other's perspective because it threatens our own sense of rightness.
Okay, so if we're all kind of trapped in our own little echo chambers,
Yeah.
just reinforcing our own biases,
Yeah.
is there any hope for genuine independent thought?
Well, the article does offer a glimmer of hope, or at least a different perspective.
Okay, I'm all ears.
It suggests that there might be a less common form of independent thinking that's embodied by voluntarism and some aspects of libertarianism. And the reason the article points to these groups is because they often start with fundamental principles, like the non-aggression principle,
Okay.
which basically means not initiating force or violence against others.
Right. Right.
And they try to build their entire political and ethical framework from that principle.
So it's like they're starting from scratch with this core value and then working outwards.
Exactly, rather than just adopting an existing party platform and fitting their beliefs into that.
That is a different approach.
It is, and it's one that the article seems to see as potentially more conducive to genuine independent thought.
But even this isn't presented as a perfect model, is it?
No, not quite. The article does acknowledge that even within libertarian thought, there are inconsistencies.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
Well, for example, it points to big L libertarians who might advocate for certain state functions,
Okay.
like a court system or national defense, which, could be seen as conflicting with a strict interpretation of the non-aggression principle.
I see. So even within philosophies that prioritize individual liberty, there's still room for debate and disagreement.
Exactly. And that's actually something the article highlights as a positive sign.
Oh, really?
It seems to suggest that this willingness to question and debate even our most cherished principles is a hallmark of true independent thought.
So it's not so much about having all the answers.
No.
It's about being open to the process of questioning and refining our beliefs.
Exactly. It's about being willing to have those tough conversations, even when they make us uncomfortable, because that's how we grow and evolve as thinkers.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah, it's a much more dynamic and engaging approach to forming our beliefs than just blindly accepting a prepackaged ideology.
And the article contrasts this, this kind of open debate with the often rigid adherence to party lines that we see in mainstream politics.
Right, where dissenting opinions are often silenced or dismissed as disloyal.
So it's almost like true independent thought requires a certain level of discomfort.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. It requires a willingness to challenge our own assumptions and to engage with ideas that might make us question our deeply held beliefs.
Because if we're only surrounding ourselves with people who agree with us, we're never really going to grow.
Right. We just end up in an echo chamber, reinforcing our existing biases.
So according to the article, simply identifying as a Republican or a Democrat, regardless of your personal beliefs, inherently means you're part of a system that exerts authority.
That's the article's argument, yes.
That's a pretty strong statement.
It is, and it's one that's likely to spark some debate.
Oh, for sure.
But the article's point is that by aligning yourself with a political party, you're participating in a system that, by its very nature, seeks to wield power and enforce decisions.
Even if your personal motivations are, good.
Right. Even if you genuinely believe you're fighting for freedom or justice or a better society.
The very act of, as the article puts it, voting for masters
Yeah, voting for masters.
reinforces those power structures you might claim to oppose.
It's a thought-provoking argument, for sure.
It is. It
It
is.
challenges us to think critically about the ways in which we participate in the systems we might be trying to change.
So what's the alternative?
What does the article propose as a path to authentic independence?
Yeah, it can't just leave us with the feeling that, we're all just cogs in slightly different machines.
Right.
What's the way out?
Well, the article's conclusion is, I guess you could say, pretty radical.
Okay, lay on me.
It suggests that true rebellion lies in a fundamental rejection of all forms of imposed authority and centralized power,
Whoa, okay.
including questioning the very belief in the necessity of government itself.
So we're talking about like a really fundamental shift in how we view the world and our place in it.
Exactly. It's a call to move beyond those superficial expressions of rebellion, like adopting a certain style or voting for a particular party, and to strive to become a truly sovereign individual.
What does that even mean?
Well, in the context of the article, it means someone who takes full responsibility for their own thoughts and actions.
Right.
Someone who is free from the dictates of any external authority.
So it's about cultivating that internal sense of freedom, that ability to think for yourself, to make your own choices, and to live in accordance with your own values.
Precisely.
And that can be a really scary thing, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's much easier to follow the crowd, to conform to the norms of our chosen group, even if those norms are presented as rebellious.
Right, and that brings us back to the article's central analogy.
To joining a different herd idea.
Yeah, can you unpack that one last time?
Sure. So the article uses the example of, let's say, a goth teenager, right?
Okay.
This teenager might feel like they're rebelling against mainstream society with their, dark clothing, their music, their whole outlook.
Right, but they're still conforming to the norms of a subculture.
Exactly. They've just traded one herd for another, one set of expectations for another, even if those expectations are framed as being anti-establishment or countercultural.
And it's the same in politics, right?
Yeah, the article argues that voters who passionately believe they're anti-establishment by aligning with a particular party or movement might, in reality, just be following the dictates of the different political machine, a different herd, without truly engaging in independent critical thought.
So the big takeaway here is that true independence isn't about switching allegiances from one pre-packaged set of beliefs to another.
Right.
It's about questioning everything.
Yeah, it's about constantly challenging assumptions, both our own and those of the groups we identify with.
About cultivating that critical, independent voice within yourself.
Precisely. It's an ongoing commitment to questioning, analyzing, and arriving at your own conclusions, rather than simply accepting the narratives and ideologies presented to you.
Even if it means standing apart from any particular crowd.
Especially if it means standing apart from the crowd.
It's like instead of trying to fit in, you're choosing to stand out by simply being yourself, by thinking for yourself.
Yeah, it's about embracing the uncertainty and the discomfort of not having all the answers and of being okay with not fitting neatly into any one box.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for all of us to take a good hard look in the mirror and ask ourselves,
Oh, yes.
where are we conforming to a pre-packaged form of rebellion without even realizing it?
And are we truly as independent in our thinking as we believe we are? That's the question we all need to grapple with.
Definitely gives you a lot to think about.
A lot to ponder indeed.
Long after this deep dive is over.
Yeah, that's the goal, right? To keep the conversation going.
Exactly.
To spark that inner dialogue and to encourage people to keep questioning and exploring and challenging their own beliefs.
Because that's how we grow.
That's how we learn.
And ultimately, that's how we become truly free.
To think for ourselves.
To think for ourselves.
And to create a world where independent thought is valued and celebrated.
All right, that's all the time we have for today.
Great deep dive.
But keep those wheels turning, folks.
Keep questioning.
Keep questioning.
Keep exploring.
Keep exploring.
And most importantly, keep thinking for yourselves.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.
Looking forward to it.